Howdy friends, how y'all doing today? We're going to be reading from this book. Let me show you the cover. The cover of the book is called, for fuck's sake, the lighting, Captive Genders. There we go. So this book is a collection of essays. I have previously read from this book on this channel, and the particular author that I read from last time was none other than Chelsea Manning. For those who don't know, man, I am so pasty. Let's see, can we fix this a little bit? Ooh, kind of like telling a ghost story, sort of. I am so pasty. I don't know, maybe. Anyway, so I can't put the light further back, so we're gonna have to deal with this for today. Okay, cool. So we're gonna be talking about building an abolitionist movement, and also a trans and queer movement with everything we got. That's what the name of the chapter is going to be about that we read from today. And yeah, I'm an abolitionist. I think a lot of you already know I'm an abolitionist. I am primarily a police abolitionist and a prison abolitionist. And that's what this book is primarily about, is police and prison abolition from the perspective of a queer and trans person. And this has a collection of essays written from that perspective. So we're going to be reading from this. And the name of the authors, it looks like there's 3 authors for this specific essay we're reading from. And I might be pronouncing some of these names wrong, so forgive me if I do. Morgan Basichis, and then the next one is Alexander Lee, and the last one is Dean Spade. So that's what we're going to be reading from today. Building an abolitionist, trans, and queer movement with everything we've got. I'd say let's not beat around the bush and let's just get right to it. As we write this, queer and trans people across the United States and in many parts of the world have just celebrated the 40th anniversary of the Stonewall Rebellion. On that fateful night back in June 1969, sexual and gender outsiders rose up against ongoing brutal police violence in an inspiring act of defiance. These early freedom fighters knew all too well that the NYPD, New York's finest, were the frontline threat to queer and trans survival. Hello, Miss Danger. How you doing? Good to see you. Stonewall was the culmination of years of domination, resentment, and upheaval in many marginalized communities, coming to a new consciousness of the depth of violence committed by the government against poor people, people of color, women, and queer people, both within the U.S. borders and around the world. The Stonewall Rebellion, the mass demonstration against the war in Vietnam, and the campaign to free imprisoned black liberation activist Assata Shakur were all powerful examples of a groundswell of energy demanding an end to the business as usual of U.S. terror during this time. Could these groundbreaking and often unsung activists have imagined that only 40 years later, the official, quote-unquote official, gay rights agenda would be largely pro-police, pro-prison, and pro-war? Exactly the forces they worked so hard to resist. Just a few decades later, the most visible and well-funded arms of the LGBT movement looks much more like a corporate strategized session than a grassroots social justice movement. There are countless examples of this dramatic shift in priorities. What emerged as a fight against racist, anti-poor, and anti-queer police violence now works hand in hand with local and federal law enforcement agencies. District attorneys are asked to speak at trans rallies. Cops march in gay pride parades. The agendas of prosecutors, those who lock up our families and friends and lovers, and many queer and trans organizations, are becoming increasingly similar, with sentence and police enhancing legislation at the top of the priority list. Hate crimes legislation is tacked on to multi-billion-dollar defense bills to support U.S. domination or U.S. military domination in Palestine, Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere. Despite the rhetoric of an LGBT community, transgender and gender non-conforming people are repeatedly abandoned and marginalized in the agendas and priority of our lead organizations. Most recently in 2007, gutting of the Employment Non-Discrimination Act of gender identity protections. And as the rate of people, particularly poor, queer, and trans people of color, without steady jobs, housing, or health care continues to rise, and health and social services continue to be cut, those dubbed the leaders of the LGBT movement insist that marriage rights are the way to redress the inequalities of our communities. For more and more queer and trans people, regardless of marital status, I misread that. There is no inheritance, no health benefits from employers, no legal immigration status, and no state protection of our relationship to our children. 4 decades after queer and trans people took to the streets throwing heels, bottles, bricks, and anything else that we had to ward off police, the official word is that, except for being able to get married and fight in the military, we're pretty much free, safe, and equal. And those of us who are not must wait until the priority battles are won by the largely white male upper class layers and lobbyists who know better than us. That sounds very, very familiar. Fortunately, Radical Queer and Trans Organization for Deep Transformation has also grown alongside this trickle-down brand of equality. Politics mentioned above. Although there is no neat line between official gay equality politics on one hand and radical justice politics on the other, it is important to draw out some of the key distinctions in how different parts of our movement today are responding to the main problems that queer and trans people face. This is less about creating false dichotomies between good and bad approaches, and more about clarifying the actual impact that various strategies have, and recognizing that alternative approaches to the official solution are alive, are politically viable, and are being pursued by activists and organizations around the United States and beyond. In the first column, we identify some of these main challenges. In the second, we summarize what solutions are being offered by the well-resourced segments of our movement. And in the third, we outline some approaches being used by more radical and progressive queer trans organizing to expand the possibilities for broad-based social justice solutions to these same problems. I think that's a good, general thesis to sort of lay out what the situation is here, and that is reform ain't enough. If reform ain't never been enough, and I think what we had just recently seen was Derek Chauvin being convicted of all 3 charges, which is good. I mean, that's what it's supposed to happen in the courtroom. I mean, the evidence was blatantly fucking clear, but then you still have police officers killing black people still. Like, it's still happening. Like, it happened on the same day George Floyd's killer was convicted of a crime. So nothing really changed, and no real justice has been implemented. But it is a step in the right direction. Next is one cop killer, and next, the rest of them. The rest of the motherfucking pigs. So, I don't know how to read this to you, because it's laid out a very specific way. It's like, these are charts. These are charts here. So, we will... okay, so I know how to read this now. So, the way it works is... and I'll show you, for a clarification. You can see that there's the problem, the official solution, and then the transformative responses. Or rather, transformative approaches. So, it looks like I gotta read a few of these, and then we will discuss them as we go along. So the current landscape of big problems, one of the big problems is queer and trans people, poor people, and people of color, and immigrants have minimal access to quality health care. The official solution is to legalize same-sex marriage to allow people with health benefits from their jobs to share with same-sex partners. The only thing is, we can't always get married. And not only that, like, some of us don't want to get married. I sure as hell don't want to get married. I see that there's benefits in getting married, but I mean, it doesn't, like, from what I've seen, from other people who've gotten married, and also just from that super fucking high divorce rate that the United States got, I don't think I want to get married. But the transformative approach to this would be to strengthen Medicaid and Medicare, win universal health care, fight for transgender health benefits, and end the deadly medical neglect of people in state custody. And that's really, I mean, that while it is, while it is talking about like reform still, these are things that will definitely benefit the material conditions of the people that it is advocating to fight for. And I would say that we would need to continue to fight for those reforms in that respect in order to make the material conditions better for the people that this book is advocating for. But at the same time, we need to go beyond that, I'd say. We need to go beyond just reform so that way we have health care. Because if we have universal health care, the system's going to try to fight against that at some point. The system's going to try to fight against our ability to have universal health care. And then we'll be back to square one. So that's why we need to go even beyond that. But I'm jumping ahead of the game here. This has more problems and solutions, which I feel would further address, that problem I just laid out. So the next big problem is queer and trans people experience regular and often fatal violence from partners, family members, community members, employers, law enforcement, and institutional officials. So the official solution to that would be to pass hate crime legislation, to increase prison sentences, and strengthen local and federal law enforcement. Collect statistics on rates of violence, collaborate with local and federal law enforcement to prosecute hate violence and domestic violence. So yeah, that doesn't really solve anything, because the police are the ones who are hurting us in the first place. I mean, I've been harassed for being trans by the police before. I almost got hurt by the police for being trans. Very specifically, I was targeted and profiled even. So I don't see, making harsher prison sentences benefiting me at all. So the transformative approach to this problem is to build community relationships and infrastructure to support the healing and transformation of people who have been impacted by interpersonal and intergenerational violence. Join with movements addressing root causes of queer and trans premature death, including police violence, imprisonment, poverty, immigration policies, and lack of healthcare and housing. So right there, it addresses what the problem is and how to go about the solution with that in a much more effective way than the state would. And the state is really, let's be honest here, in this example that it points out here, the only reason why the state would, do this in the first place is for profit. If you fund the military, if you fund the police, and if you fund the prisons, the prison industry makes more money. Prison labor produces more capital for those who benefit from it, like Walmart and Whole Foods and Target and Monsanto and your typical goblins and the high towers. But more importantly, it doesn't really help or address the problems that we have here. One example I can think of is, and I think this is a blatantly obvious one, is how both Florida and Arkansas under the Biden administration have passed anti-trans legislation, either denying trans health care or using their genitals to decide what to do with them. That shit just fucking disgusts me. So, and this is, by the way, after Biden enforced the Equality Act. So the Equality Act, it helps on a federal level, but it doesn't help on a state level. So we got a few more of these. Actually, we got quite a few more of these. So the next big problem is queer and trans members of the military experience violence. Hold on, I read that wrong. Queer and trans members of the military experience violence and discrimination. So the official solution to this is eliminate bans on participation of gay and lesbians in the U.S. military. I can say that I know some queer and trans veterans, and I think we all agree. Why the fuck would I want to join the military? Really? You want me to join the fucking military and start shooting people that I've never met before? I don't want that. I don't want to be involved in that. That sounds like a horrible time. I don't think I can honestly find myself just going out into another country and shooting people. Unless it's a video game, I actually would be down to shoot people in a video game. I like shooting games sometimes, the first-person shooter. I'm not really that deep into that kind of gaming culture, but I do find myself enjoying it once in a while. So the transformative approach to this is to join with war resistors, radical veterans, and young people who oppose military intervention, occupation, and war abroad and at home, and demand the reduction, or rather the elimination, of defense budget. You know, that's something that's pretty important, right? Is there's a lot of veterans. I know we typically like to give veterans shit, and in some cases it's warranted. I mean, veterans sometimes come home like, you know, with more of a power trip than they've ever had before. But a lot of veterans, and I think a majority of veterans I've met, they didn't like what they did over there. They didn't like being part of it. They didn't like participating in the imperialist structure. So I think it's fair to say that the people who came back and experienced the wars firsthand, you know, I feel like they deserve a voice, and a lot of them are queer and trans, you know, and I think that if we, you know, were to deny them a voice, then what good is our movement, really? Like, honestly. Remember to drink water, folks. It's good for the soul. And also, boycott Nestle. Just saying. The next big problem. Queer and trans people are targeted by an unfair and punitive immigration system. So the official solution to this would be legalize same-sex marriage to allow same-sex internal couples to apply for legal residency for the non-US citizen spouse. I don't know, I think we should abolish borders, but that's just my solution. But I see that there's a lengthy answer to this too. Let's go over that one. So the answer to this, the transformative solution, or approach rather, is end the use of immigration policy to criminalize people of color. We shouldn't be criminalizing people of color to begin with. You know, the color of your skin, it doesn't make you a criminal. End the immigration policy that is used to exploit workers, and maintain the deadly wage gap in the United States and the global South. Support current detainees and end ICE raids, deportation, and police collaboration. And I'd say more importantly, this is one of my solutions personally, if I may add a few. Defend immigrants and also arm immigrants. Like straight up. Like, we need to protect immigrants from being killed and murdered by ICE agents. And I know you're watching, Secret Services. I don't give a fuck what you gotta say. You ain't a thought police to me. So the next big problem is queer and trans families are vulnerable to legal intervention and separation from the state, institutions, and or non-queer people. So the official solution to this is legalize same-sex marriage. See, we have a pattern here. To provide a route to legalize families with two parents of the same sex, pass law banning adoption discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. See, like that one, it's like a step in the right direction as far as I can tell. Because I mean, like, you know, if a same-sex couple wants to adopt some children, then like they should be able to. but I feel like that's not necessarily enough, because it still requires you to get married and have kids and do a lot of extra paperwork that is not necessary. So the transformative approach to this would be join with struggles of queer and trans and non-queer and trans families of color, imprisoned parents and youth, Native families, poor families, military families, and people with disabilities to win community and family self-determination and the right to keep kids, parents, and other family members in the families and communities. Because the last thing we need is families to be fucking separated and not doing well or prospering in this society that we have, or rather, this fucking hellscape of an economic system that we call capitalism. Well, the last thing we need is capitalism, period. Really, I mean, if I'm being honest with you. So the next big problem to this is institutions fail to recognize family connections outside of heterosexual marriage in contexts like hospital visitation and inheritance. And that's very true. Like, I mean, the whole system is heteronormative, and, you know, there's a lot of times when you have to use your dead name and use your assigned, you know, gender at birth when you discuss things on a medical level, or when you do paperwork to get benefits or services, or to sign documentations on housing and livability things, you know, things that the state needs to do, which it doesn't do a lot of the time unless you own a lot of capital. Legalize same-sex marriage to formally recognize same-sex partners in the eyes of the law. That's the official solution. I don't think same-sex marriage should be a thing the law determines. You know, I feel like that should be a thing, you know, regardless of whether the law determines it. But that's just my opinion. Let's see what the transformative approach is. By the way, let me know if this is interesting to you. I mean, I'm having fun reading this. I hope this is an interesting discussion for y'all. So the transformative approach to this is change the policies like hospital visitation to recognize a variety of family structures, not just opposite sex and same-sex couples, abolish inheritance, and demand radical redistribution of wealth and an end to poverty. Well, no, we can't have that. We can't have that. You know, that's socialism right there. You can't have socialism, none. You know, then Stalin's gonna come out of the grave and he's gonna shoot laser beams at all of the patriots, right? So, the last big problem, folks, that this chart brings up, and I'm sure there are going to be other charts in this soon. But I like the format they got going on here. It's very easy to understand. Lots of good examples. The big problem is queer and trans people are disproportionately policed, arrested, and imprisoned, and face high rates of police violence in the state custody from officials, as well as other imprisoned and detained people. The official solution to this, and I mean, like, I can't imagine a liberal really meaningfully addressing this. But let's see what the official solution is. Advocate for cultural competency training for law enforcement and the construction of queer and trans-specific and gender-responsive facilities. Create written policies that say that queer and trans people are equal to other people in the state custody. Stay largely silent on the high rates of imprisonment in queer and trans communities of color, and poor communities. So what that basically means is that if you have a prison guard who is beating the fuck out of you every day, you know, the prison guard will still use the right pronouns. You know, that's just, again, not meaningful at all. So the transformative approach to this, and this is lengthy, which means I'm hoping that it's a good one. Build ongoing accountable relationships with and advocate for queer and trans people who are locked up to support their daily well-being, healing, leadership, and survival. Build community networks of care to support people coming out of prison and jail. Collaborate with other movements to address the root causes of queer and trans imprisonment. Work to abolish prisons. Establish community support for people with disabilities and eliminate medical and psychiatric institutionalization and provide permanent housing rather than shelter beds for all people without homes. We have like so many houses that are vacant right now in America. Like, can you imagine how many people we could house? And like, fucking Jeff Bezos owns so much money, you know? How can we have a fucking man who can solve world hunger probably 8 times in a row and, you know, not do something like that? You know, when we're suffering. When we're all suffering. You know, not even just queer and trans people. Like, we're all suffering here. I think that's a valid question to pose. You know, that's part of anarchism, by the way, anarchism is about addressing the injustices in our institutions in order to solve them in a way that is outside of the box. I'm going to read the chat just a little bit just to see how we're doing. We got 7 people, and we're glad to have all 7 of you. Doesn't seem like the chat's too active, but I'm glad to see some faces in here. Love your live reads, your live reads of literature, theory, stories, and elaborations on topics, terms, and practice have always been your consistently best work, in my humble opinion. Thank you. And I actually did decide to do this based on popular demand. A lot of people have been bringing this up lately. I figured I'd do a read on a day that I failed to upload a video, so I decided I'm just gonna keep reading, and we'll see what happens. I'll read more often, if that makes you happy. Sometimes reading is just not where my mind wants to be. Today's the day. I've been wanting to read this book more anyway. So back to the book. So the first section of this is it's called "How Did We Get Here?" And that's a good question. That's a good question because it poses, you know, we've gone through the problems, and now we have all these problems. How did we get to this problem here? Let's take a gander. Okay. The streams of conservative, as well as more progressive and radical queer and trans politics, developed over time, and in the context of a rapidly changing political, economic, and social landscape. Although we can't offer a full history of how these different streams developed and how the more conservative, one-grained national dominance we think it is important to trace the historical context in which these shifts occurred. To chart a different course of our movement, we need to understand the road we've traveled. In particular, we believe that there are 2 major features of the second half of the 20th century that shaped the context in which the queer and trans movement developed. One, the active resistance and challenge by radical movement to state violence and subsequent systematic backlash. And two, the massive turmoil and transformation of the global economy. Activists and scholars use a range of terms to describe this era in which power, wealth, and oppression were transformed to respond to these two significant crises. So these words include neoliberalism, the New World Order, empire, globalization, free market democracy, or late capitalism. I would personally say be careful with some of those terms. They are considered dog whistles by the right wing. But it's not like these things are not true. I mean, you know, globalization and the free market free market democracy and shit. That shit is detrimental. But just be careful, you know, when you engage with the right wing. You know, words like the New World Order and globalization, they're usually referred to as anti-Semitic slurs or, you know, dog whistles. So just be careful with that. Each term describes a different aspect or take on the current historical movement that we are living in. It is important to be clear that none of the strategies of the New World Order are new. They might work faster, use new technology, and recruit to help new groups, but they are not new. Oppressive dynamics in the United States are as old as the colonialization of this land and the founding of a country based on slavery and genocide. However, they have taken intensified, tricky forms in the past few decades, particularly because our governments keep telling us those institutions and practices have been abolished. There were no good old days in the United States, just times in which our movement and our communities were stronger or weaker, and times when we used different cracks in the system of opportunities of resistance. All in all, we might characterize the past many decades as a time in which policies and ideas were promoted by powerful nations and institutions such as the World Trade Organization and the International Monetary Fund to destroy the minimal safety nets set up for vulnerable people, dismantle the gain made by social movements, and redistribute wealth, resources, and life changes upward away from poor people and towards the elite. So below are some of the key tactics the United States and others have used in this most recent chapter in our history. So it gives a bunch of key points, and it also goes into several examples. So these are, I guess, what I would say, like, ways the United States handles, you know, foreign affairs and let me put it this way. It handles our problems poorly, you know, as a state. That's what I'm trying to say. And it also backfires against us when we fuel these institutions that claim to be helping us. So let's start with the first one. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps again. The United States government and its ally nations and institutions in the global north helped pass laws and policies that made it harder for workers to organize into unions, destroyed welfare programs, and created the image of people on welfare as immoral and fraudulent, and created international economic policies and trade agreements that have reduced safety nets, workers' rights, and environmental protections, particularly for nations in the global south. Together, these efforts have dismantled laws and social programs meant to protect people from poverty, violence, sickness, and other harms of capitalism. Here's an example, and I actually am very well aware of this example. I'm glad that this is included in this book. In the early 1990s, the North American Free Trade Agreement, also known as NAFTA, was implemented by the United States under Democratic President Bill Clinton to make it easier for corporations to do business across the borders between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. Unfortunately, by allowing corporations to outsource their labor much more cheaply, the agreement also led to the loss of hundreds of thousands of U.S. jobs and wage depression, even in job-receiving countries. Additionally, human rights advocates have documented widespread violations of worker rights since NAFTA, including favoritism towards employer-controlled unions, firing for workers' organizing efforts, denial of collective bargaining rights, forced pregnancy testing, mistreatment of migrant workers, life-threatening health and safety conditions, and other violations of the right to freedom of association, freedom from discrimination, and the right to a minimum wage. Loss of jobs in the United States reduced the bargaining power of the workers, now more desperate for wages than ever, and both wages and benefits declined, with many workers now forced to work as temp or part-time with no benefits or job security. Fucking tell me about it. That's literally my life. That's literally my life right there. I mean, I've never had a secure job, even a job that I've had for 3 years and got paid very well. I've never had a secure job. And even when I got paid very well and worked for 3 years, for fuck's sake, I mean, I couldn't make rent. You know, I wasn't able to do the things I needed to do to survive. We got another example, actually. Apparently, this is also a Bill Clinton example. In 1996, President Bill Clinton signed into law the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act, which effectively dismantled what existed of a welfare state, creating a range of restrictive and targeting measures that required work, limited aid, and increased penalties for welfare recipients. The federal government abdicated, I've never seen that word before, abdicated its responsibility to provide minimal safety net for poor and working class people, using the rhetoric of personal responsibility and work to justify the exploitation and pain caused by capitalism and racism. Sexist, racist images of poor people as immoral, fraudulent drug addicts fueled by these policy changes. Since then, different cities have adopted local measures to cut economic safety nets for poor, homeless, and working class people. In San Francisco, Mayor Newsom, notorious 2002 Care Not Cash program, slashed welfare benefits for homeless people, insisting that benefits given to homeless were being spent on drugs and alcohol. You know, when you get an EBT card or a SNAP card or something like that, like it's not easy to buy drugs and alcohol with that. In fact, they have a prevention method of doing that if you try to buy drugs or alcohol. Like, on SNAP in particular, they also have a lot of weird restrictions too. So one time I took my SNAP card and I went to an Albertsons and I wanted to buy like a cooked fried chicken. Now I can get a frozen fried chicken if I wanted to, but I wanted a cooked one. So, you know, I went to the deli, I ordered a whole fried chicken, and when I went to go pay and I used my SNAP card, they couldn't give it to me. Because you can't do that. You can't have cooked, warm, fresh fried chicken. You gotta get the more expensive and frozen one in the freezer way in the back. Can't do that, none. You can't get the good stuff. You know what I'm saying? And I don't consider deli fried chicken to be a drug or an alcohol of some sort. I feel that is a bullshit restriction. And if I really want fried chicken, god damn it, I'm gonna get some fucking fried chicken. Give me some fried chicken, motherfucker. It's for real. So this next one, it's another method that the United States uses. It's called scapegoating. I've actually discussed scapegoating quite a bit. Scapegoating it's a very fascist like tactic. They even talk about it in Fascism if you're interested in reading that book. So scapegoating is the idea that, you know, we have an enemy. You know, the United States got an enemy, and the enemy is really actually a vulnerable person or a vulnerable group of people, and it's usually trying to use that as a means to fuel like military intervention or defense spending or more spending on the police. It's a tough on crime kind of tactic, if you will. You know, in the United States, we've used scapegoating multiple times. You know, and in this case, they've been talking about immigrants and welfare recipients. But we've also, in the United States, have used scapegoats to justify the war in Iraq. You know, we said that the Iraqi terrorists got the weapons of mass destruction, and we got to go find it. We never found such a thing, and we're still there today. And you know, it's not like anything meaningful really happened during that, other than the bloodshed of way too many fucking people. Definitely more than the number of people who died on 9/11. I mean, did we get our revenge yet? I don't know. Jeez. Fuck U.S. imperialism, seriously. So, scapegoating. The decrease in manufacturing jobs and the gutting of social safety nets for the poor and working class created a growing class of people who are marginally employed and housed and forced into criminalized economies such as sex work and the drug trade. This class of people was blamed for the poverty and equity they faced, labeled drug dealers, welfare queens, criminals, and hoodlums, and were used to justify harmful policies that expanded violence and harm. At the same time, criminal penalties, misread that again, for behaviors associated with poverty, like drug use, sleeping outside, graffiti, and sex work, have increased in many parts of the United States, and resources for policing these kinds of crimes has also increased. So, wow, okay. I guess I gotta give one criticism to this book, and that is, you might want to use other examples other than Bill Clinton. I mean, these are good examples, and like I said, I've read up on some of these things, but it's a lot of examples about Bill Clinton. You know what I'm saying? Maybe this was written in the 90s. I don't know. I mean, not this book, but this particular essay. Maybe. I don't know. I mean, right in the next page, they reference 9/11. So I don't know. I'm just saying there's a lot of references to Bill Clinton here. Not a bad thing. It's just might wanna diversify just a little bit. Anyway, in the 1990s, this is an example. In the 1990s, across the United States began to sign into law the so-called three strikes measure that mandated standards, long, often life sentences for people convicted of 3 felonies, many including non-violent offenses. California's law, where I'm from, has resulted in sentences of 25 years or more for people convicted of things like shoplifting. The popularity of 3 strikes laws have been fueled by a growing cultural obsession with criminality and punishment that relies on images of violent and dangerous career criminals while functioning to imprison enormous numbers of low-income people and people of color whose behaviors are the direct result of economic insecurities. So, like, you know, they're pretty much saying, you know, the mafia be the criminals, and we're all part of the mafia, we're all part of some secret organizational gang, and, you know, they used the word gang a lot in the 90s, I know that, to scapegoat people of color, and it is used to justify hateful legislation and policies. Another example, a Bill Clinton example. Under President Bill Clinton in 1996, welfare reforms, anyone evicted of a drug-related crime is automatically banned for life from receiving cash assistance and food stamps. Some states have since opted out of this ban, but for people living in 15 states, this draconian measure presents nearly insurmountable barriers to becoming self-sufficient. Unable to receive cash assistance and subject to job discrimination because of their criminal histories, many people with drug-related convictions go back to the drug trade as the only way to earn enough to pay rent and to put food on the table. The lifetime welfare ban has been shown to particularly harm women and their children, which is counterintuitive to what the bill is it's supposedly supposed to do. It's supposed to prevent, you know, the drugs from being used by scaring you into saying, look, if you do the drugs, then you ain't gonna get the things you need to survive. But the problem is that it actually perpetuates the drug trade. It actually perpetuates the war on drugs that never really ended, now did it? You know, and we can also discuss a little bit of, I mean, we just had 420 yesterday, and we can also discuss a little bit on how, you know, cannabis being legalized in a lot of the states today, but they're not really decriminalized, now are they? You know, because there are still people in prison today based on those drug offenses, based on marijuana possession and use offenses. They never really left prison, now did they? Now the next section is called fear-mongering. The government and corporate media use racist, xenophobic, and misogynist fear-mongering to distract us from increasing economic disparities and a growing underclass in the United States and abroad. The war on drugs in the 1980s and the Bush administration's war on terror, finally, leaving the Bill Clinton, both of which were ongoing, created by internal and external enemies, criminals and terrorists, to blame for and distract from the ravages of racism, capitalism, patriarchy, and imperialism. In exchange, these enemies and anyone who looked like them could be targeted with violence and murder. During this time, the use of prisons, policing, detention, and surveillance skyrocketed as the government declared formal war against all those who it marks as criminals or terrorists. We got some examples here. We got two examples. In the 1980s, the United States government declared a war on drugs. Now really ask yourself this. What the fuck is a war on drugs? What country are the drugs from? Are they a people group? Why are we declaring war on drugs? That's just the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And drastically increased mandatory sentences for violating drug prohibition laws. Prohibition laws? Laws that prevent you from doing drugs, I guess. It also created a new prohibition for for accessing public housing, public benefits, and higher education for people convicted of drug crimes. The result was the imprisonment of over 1 million people a year. The permanent marginalization and disenfranchisement of people convicted, and a new set of military and foreign policy intervention justifications for the United States to take brutal action in Latin America. Now this next example, I mentioned this earlier, it's about 9/11. Following the September 11, 2001 attack of the World Trade Center in New York, politicians manipulated the Americans' public fear and uncertainty to push through a range of new laws and policies justified by a declared war on terror. New legislation like the Patriot Act, the Immigration and Registration Act, and the Real ID Act, some of these are very recent by the way, as well as new administrative policies and practices increased the surveillance state, reduced even the most basic rights and living standards of immigrants, and turned the local police, school teachers, and hospital workers and others into immigration enforcement officers. Okay. And that's kind of interesting because it's like with Nazi Germany, the scapegoat was, and they used fear-mongering for this too, the scapegoat was, the Marxists, the Jews, the cultural Bolsheviks, as they called it back then. Now they call it the cultural Marxists. The gay folks, all them really bad people that we Aryans don't like. And then now for the United States, they use a range of scapegoats too. I mean, Hitler literally took it right out of fucking, Andrew Jackson's playbook. We got, the Muslims and the feminists and the LGBT community. We got the SJWs. We got the cultural Marxists. We got plenty of scapegoats that we have to justify the violence that we use against others. And it's ridiculous. Like, it doesn't work. It doesn't help anyone. It doesn't really meaningfully help anyone at all at the end of the day. And what I find kind of interesting, and I think this isn't really talked about enough, and I don't know if this book will bring it up at all, but the war on terror and the war on drugs, well, it did mention for the war on drugs, but the war on terror specifically, it never really solved terrorism. When the United States invaded Iraq and Baghdad, the military, specifically under the directions of L. Paul Bremer, gutted all of the social programs in that country. I'm not condoning, the legacy of Saddam Hussein or whatever. That's not what I intend to do. But I do want to say that Baghdad was better off. I mean, let's face it, like 50 years ago, it was way better off than it is now. And it's not at the fault of a handful of Middle Eastern terrorists. It's at the handful of a small minority of rich politicians who fuel the war industry, the ammunition industry. It's genuinely fucked, because when you have like corporations like General Electric fueling, arms manufacturing and weapons distribution, to a large degree in the states inside of the state institution, then you really have a recipe for more terrorism. I mean, that's how ISIS became a thing, by the way. That's also how the World Trade Center got hit, over 20 years ago. Actually, I think it's been almost 20 years ago. I think we're just about to hit year 20 later this year. But more importantly, like, when we observe this, we also observe, like, the history of, and you gotta understand the context of it too. Like, for example, when the United States intervened in the Afghan-Soviet Union war in I think the 70s or 80s, I don't have the exact date on my right off the top of my head, but when this happened, the CIA and MI6, which is the British version of the CIA, they intervened and they gave the Mujahideen guerrillas weapons for the exchange of capital. And because they had a huge opium resource and they gutted their education system to make the opium, they traded with the United States and MI6 in order to get weapons to fight the Soviet Union. And when that war was over, there was no Marshall Plan like, the United States gave to Germany. And that's what came of Al-Qaeda, because one of the members of the Mujahideen guerrillas was Osama bin Laden. So it's like, when you have these contexts like this, when you look at the historical context of what came of today's war on terror, it's really rather unjustified that we have a war on terror. In fact, actually, it's really baffling, because there was one point in history where, I forget which paper it was, I think it might have been the New York Times, but in the 90s, I think 93, there was an article that literally called Osama bin Laden an anti-Soviet American hero. Can you imagine that, like, standing today? Like, can you imagine, like, even as a liberal, like I was talking to some conservative uncle or something, and then like they started talking about Muslims, and then I said, "Oh well, but it's Osama bin Laden. He's an anti-Soviet American hero." You know, after 9/11, of course. Can you imagine me doing that? No, like that's ridiculous. That is just ridiculous. We got. I think we have a lot more to read. Actually, we have quite a bit to read. Yeah, we have a lot to read. We might have to make this into a part 2. Yeah, we're gonna make this into a part 2. Yeah, we're looking at like somewhat like 20 pages here. So I will finish reading this section, which is still a very long section. Oh my god, yeah. Actually, yeah. I will continue to read until page 34. I am on page 29. But then we're going to have to call it for the day. I am getting a little tired reading, but we do need to do some more reading. And I think that's reasonable. I can always return to this tomorrow. And I think according to you guys have been quite enjoying this. You enjoy when I read to y'all, so... Hassan, you asked what book this is. This is Captive Genders. It's a collection of essays based on trans imprisonment. So yeah, abdiction means to vacate or failure to do so. Means testing is bullshit and manufactured consent keeps happening. Yeah, fuck scapegoating. Hello, Jeff Goff. Good to see you. Anyway, I'm going to go back to reading this a bit. Hope you guys are enjoying this. So the next part is the myth that violence and discrimination are just about bad individuals. I think that's a common mistake a lot of liberals and even some progressives tend to make. And then obviously, you know, bootlickers do too. Discrimination laws and hate crime laws encourage us to understand oppression as something that happens when individuals use bias to deny someone a job because of race or sex or some other characteristic, or beat up or kill someone because of such a characteristic. This way of thinking, sometimes called the perpetrator perspective, makes people think about racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, and ableism in terms of individual behaviors and bad intentions rather than wide-scale structural oppression that often operates without some obvious individual actor aimed at denying an individual person an opportunity. The violence of imprisoning millions of poor people and people of color, for example, can't be adequately explained by finding one nasty racist individual, but instead requires looking at a whole web of institutions, policies, and practices that make it normal and necessary to warehouse, displace, discard, and annihilate poor people and people of color. Thinking about violence and oppression as the work of a few bad apples, well, quite well worded there, undermines our ability to analyze our conditions systemically and intergenerationally, and to therefore organize for systematic change. This narrow way of thinking about oppression is repeated in law, policy, and the media and nonprofit. And that's kind of like the crux of what happened with Derek Chauvin and George Floyd, right? You know, Derek Chauvin, I'm glad that he's getting convicted, but like I said earlier, someone was killed the same day he got convicted. It's not like anything really changed. Not like any real, genuine, meaningful change occurred on that day. It's like, it's almost like, it's almost kind of like, what do you call it? Like as if getting revenge or something. That's not what we're looking for. We're not looking for revenge, I mean, for fuck's sake, I want revenge on Derek Chauvin and every other pig that's ever done his job. But, I mean, at the end of the day, that's not what this is about. That's not what abolition ultimately is about. It's not about going out and executing every police officer, though that is the dream in a video game, in maybe Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. But what this really is about is abolishing and creating, it's about abolishing institutions that perpetuate these systems of oppression and creating a new solution that is transformative and mutually beneficial to the multiple communities that deal with these forms of oppression. I hope that's making sense, folks. Let me know if you're following along. So there's plenty of examples involved. Well, okay, when I say plenty, there's two examples involving what we just discussed. So Megan's Law are statutes, or Megan's Laws, plural, are statutes that require people convicted of sexual offenses to register, and that requires this information to be available to the public. These laws that have passed in jurisdictions around the country in the last 2 decades prompt by and generating public outrage about child sex abuse, or CSA. Studies estimate that 1 in 3 people raised as girls and 1 in 6 people raised as boys were sexually abused as children as a result of intergenerational trauma, community, and state-sanctioned abusive norms and alienation. Rather than resourcing comprehensive programs to support the healing of survivors and transformation of people who have been sexually abusive, or interrupt the family and community norms that contribute to the widespread of abuse of children, Megan's Law have ensured that people convicted of a range of sexual offenses face violence, the inability to find work or a place to live, and severely reduce the chances of recovery and healing. Despite the limited or non-existent direct effect of such laws, they remain the dominant official approach to the systemic problems of CSA. And it's weird because, when I look at child sex abuse, I actually want to talk about child sex abuse for a sec. And when I first started reading that paragraph, I was a little hesitant to fully agree, but I think I understand what they're talking about here. There's often times when pedophiles are fucking, in places of power. They got the money and they ain't gonna get convicted, Instead, they're often considered allegedly predatory or allegedly involved in a child sex ring. Look at Matt Gaetz, look at Donald Trump, look at fucking the Catholic Church. I mean, I'm from the Catholic Church. I've witnessed this bullshit happen in front of my own eyes. It's the most disgusting thing when you see the Catholic Church. They have a pedophile priest, and they start molesting and raping children. And after several decades, the priest goes to jail. And then the community, because the community knew that priest for so long, first they ostracized the victims, who called out on the pedophile priest, Then they raise money, for fucking, bail. They do a whole bake sale, a fundraiser. They make brownies and, they go to the church and they organize a big event to bail out the priest that just molested their kids. And then, the priest either goes back to working at that church, in celibacy or whatever, or they go to another church and they do the same thing there. There's a very specific case you ought to look into if you have the stomach to do it, and that is Brendan Smith. Brendan Smith, oh my fucking god, Brendan Smith was fucking notorious, and he is by far one of the biggest offenders in this. Yeah, he's been able to get out of prison and relocate to other churches in the Vatican, the United States, and Ireland, which is very appalling. Some numbers you might find that are pretty alarming. There is a $4.4 billion industry on child rape, and this is an example of that child rape industry and how it functions, is what I just explained. And also, as far as we're aware of, and it could be even further back, or it could still be going on today, this has been going on at least as far as the 1940s. So keep that in mind when when people discuss child predators. Yes, there are predators in the community, but mainly predators are in places of power. Even bands are like that. Even punk bands and metal bands and even country singers and rappers. I mean, honestly, they all have that same problem. It's not exclusive to one genre. It's not exclusive to one culture. They all have that problem. Conway Twitty literally wrote a song, "I've Never Seen You Go This Far Before," and it's because he was talking to someone who was potentially underage. I'm just saying. Yeah, I'm done with the rant about child sex abuse in case you wanted to return to this discussion and not listen to me talk about that. I don't blame you if you tuned out during that one. Another example of what we're talking about, though, says right here, as we write this, the Matthew Shepard Local Law Enforcement Enhancement Act has recently passed in the U.S. Senate, and if signed into law, it would give $10 million to state and local law enforcement agencies, expand federal law enforcement power focused on hate crime, and add to the death penalty as a possible punishment for those convicted. This bill is heralded as a victory for transgender people because it will make gender identity an included category in the federal hate crime law. Like Megan's Law, this law and the advocacy surrounding it, including advocacy by large LGBT nonprofit organizations, focus attention on individuals who kill people because of their identity. These laws frame the problem of violence in our communities as one of individual hateful people, when in reality, trans people face shorter lifespans because of the enormous systemic violence in welfare systems, shelters, prisons, jails, foster care, juvenile punishment systems, and immigration, and the inability to access basic survival resources. These laws do nothing to prevent our death. They just use our death to expand a system that endangers our lives and places a chokehold on our communities. For some reason, when I read the word chokehold, I was about to say cuckold. Anyway, excuse me. Sorry about that. So the next section is called Undermining Transformative Organization, or Undermining Transformative Organizing. The second half of the 20th century saw a major upsurge in radical and revolutionary organizing in oppressed communities in the United States and around the world. This powerful organizing posed a significant threat to the legitimacy of U.S. power and capitalist empire more broadly, and therefore needed to be contained. These movements were undermined by two main strategies. First, the radical movement of the 1960s and 70s were criminalized, with the United States government using tactics of imprisonment, torture, sabotage, and assassination to target and destroy groups like the Black Panthers, the American Indian Movement, and Young Lords, among others. Second, the growth of non-profit sector had seen social movements professionalizing, chasing philanthropics, dollars. That's a weird arrangement of words, sorry. Separating into issues areas and moving towards social services and legal reform projects rather than radical projects aimed at the underlying cause of poverty and injustice. These developments left significant sections of the radical left traumatized and decimated, wiping out a generation of revolutionaries and shifting terms of resistance of revolution and transformation into inclusion and reform, prioritizing state and foundation sanctioned legal reforms and social services over mass organizing and direct action. It mentioned, before we get to the examples, it mentioned the assassination and sabotage. I want to talk about that a little bit before we get into the examples. And it got I think, what, 2 examples again? Yeah, okay. We're getting 2 examples here, everyone. But I guess that's good enough. But I want to include my own example here. So I voted in the 2016 election, and I voted for a man named Daryl Sherney. Daryl Sherney was running for the Green Party in the United States election, so I voted for him. Can you say that I did a spoiler effect on the election that year? Maybe, but at the same time, I wasn't about to vote for, 2 neoliberal con artists who, one was either more fascist than the other, or the other one had her fucking hands really deep in the pockets of a bunch of really greedy fucking corporate welfare companies like Chase and Goldman Sachs. I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. But anyway, so the thing about Daryl Sherney, which drove me to be very attracted to the individual, was the FBI lost in court to Daryl Sherney for attempting to assassinate Daryl Sherney and smear the name of his activist group, Earth First. See, Earth First was a radical. I'm struggling to call them anarchists, but they definitely had anarchist views and most likely anarchist members. But they were a radical environmentalist organization that did direct action to tackle things such as deforestation. One of the tactics that they've used, not Daryl Sherney, but Judy Berry specifically described, was they would take yarn and they would throw it on, tractors and, the machinery used to cut the trees down. And the yarn would serve 2 purposes. the yarn would serve one as a barrier to get tractors to work, and that means like if there's a bunch of yarn in your gears and system, you're bound to have a recipe for disaster there. But more importantly, in order to get rid of the yarn, you can't just manly like pull it all off. You gotta take little baby scissors and you gotta cut them out. And the cool thing about that is that one, it would delay the work of cutting down trees, but it would also cost the corporations a bunch of money. So the workers were forced to work mainly on cutting up the yarn instead of actually getting the trees cut down. So this is important to know because the FBI tried to kill these people. So one day during when there was a march planned by Earth First, Daryl Sherney and Judy Berry were in the car. They were driving to the rally, and something just blew up in the car, and they were confused. They were injured, but the media, it just came around the corner as if they were just waiting. They were just waiting there, waiting right around the corner for something to happen, and they did that, and they called them environmental terrorists, and just a bunch of eco-fascists or whatever. I don't know. They were put in jail, and they fought in court for 12 years. Judy Berry, rest her soul, she died of cancer during the 12 years that they fought in court. And they eventually won against the FBI. They were able to prove in court that the FBI planted a bomb in their car. And they won $4 million. So, yeah. Anyway. Oh, and guess what? We're about to talk about the FBI again. So, this is the first example that the book gives. The FBI's counterintelligence program, or also known as COINTELPRO, is a notorious example of the U.S. government's use of infiltration, surveillance, and violence to overtly target dissent and resistance. COINTELPRO was exposed when internal government documentations were revealed that detailed the outrageous work undertaken by the federal government to dismantle resistance groups in the 1960s and 70s. Although the program was dissolved under that name, the tactics continued and can be seen today in current controversies about wiretapping and torture, as well as the USA Patriot Act. Overt action to eliminate resistance and dissent here is as old as the European colonization of North America. And like we mentioned earlier, this type of bullshit was done to prevent the Black Panthers from being able to organize. There's a lot of talk about gun control right now. A lot of people don't know that gun control was first implemented, really implemented, when the Black Panthers were a thing. The Black Panthers were driving around following police officers in their cars, and when the police officer would pull over someone, like a black man, the Black Panthers would come out to their cars with a firearm and remind the person in the car what their rights were, and they did a thing called cop watching, folks. And we need more cop watchers. We need more. And by the way, I just want to say, you should film the police. Check your local laws, but film the police. They don't like when you film them. It has nothing to do with, whatever bullshit excuse they got for not filming the police. They don't like when you film them. If anything, in a criminal case, filming would bring more evidence. And ultimately, at the end of the day, like, they don't want you filming them because you can't shoot back no more. Like, let's just face it. Like, you can't shoot back no more. If the cop is shooting you, you can't shoot back no more. And you know, I guess the next step they're trying to do is prevent you, and they're trying to pass laws to prevent you from being able to film them if they're up to no good. And by the way, that's part of the reason why you know, we're starting to see police violence on TV more often. It's not because it's happening more often, it's because they're being filmed like they should be. Let's just face it, like, I mean, it doesn't matter what the law is, they should be filmed. If a cop is doing something he ain't supposed to be doing, then he ought to be filmed for it. He ought to be held accountable for it, you know? Take your phone out and film every single little goddamn detail that fucking little piggy is doing. In the next example, involving undermining transformative organizing, the example is in the wake of decades of radical organizing by people in women's prisons and activists on the outside decrying systemic medical neglect, sexual violence, and the destruction of family bonds, California legislators in 2006 proposed a so-called gender-responsive corrections bill that would allow people in women's prisons to live with their children and receive increased social services. I got a question. Does that mean the children go to prison too? To make this plan work, the bill called for millions of dollars in new prison construction. The message of improving the lives of women's prisoners and creating more humane prisons, rhetoric that is consistently used by those in power to distract us from the fundamentally violent conditions of a capitalist police state, appealed to liberal, well-intentioned feminist researchers and advocate and legislators. Anti-prison organizations such as Oakland-based Justice Now and other working in solidarity with the resounding sentiment of people in women's prisons pointed out that this strategy was actually just a backdoor to creating 4,500 new prison beds for women in California, yet again expanding opportunities to criminalize poor women and transgender people in one of the nation's most imprisoning states. In Angela Davis's book, Are Prisons Obsolete? I have it somewhere in this room. She points out that in the first 100 years of having prisons in the United States, there was only like a small handful of prisons. Then in the 1980s, they built 9 new prisons throughout the decade, and this was when there were even less than 9 prisons in the United States at that time. And then ever since the 1980s, when the war on drugs kicked off, we've had more prisons, especially during the war on terror. We've had more prisons. I wish I had the number on me. It's in the book somewhere in my room. But it should be noted that building prisons has expanded dramatically throughout the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and 2010. So that's something to keep in mind. Oh, this is a good one. So the next section is about the hero mindset. And I think this is my biggest critique of the police, is that they have sort of like a hero mindset, to a hero mentality, like, like, I'm the good guy, you're the bad guy, I'm here to save the people from you, when that's not really the problem we're dealing with. That's not really what's causing the problems in our day-to-day lives, So, the United States loves its heroes and its narratives. Horatio Agler, never seen that name before, admittedly. So Horatio Agler, rags to riches, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, streets paved with gold. The rugged frontiersman, the benevolent philanthropist, and Obama as savior, among others. These narratives hide the uneven concentration of wealth, resources, and opportunity among different groups of people, the ways in which not everybody can just do anything if they put their minds to it and work hard enough. In the second half of the 20th century, this individualistic and celebrity-obsessed culture had a deep impact on social movements and how we write narratives. Stories of mass struggle became stories of individuals upcoming great odds. The rise of the nonprofit as a key vehicle for social change bolstered this trend, giving incentives to charismatic leaders, often executive directors, often people with privilege, to frame struggles in ways that prioritizes symbolic victories like big court cases, sensationalistic media coverage, and ignores the daily work of building a base and a movement for the long haul. This trend also compromises the base and a movement for a long... I read the same line twice. This trend compromises the accountability of leaders and organizations to their continuities and devalues activism in the trenches. All right. And we got our examples. I think we got, this is the last section, and then it got a final part, and then we got to part 2 of this chapter, which is where we're going to cut off for the day, and we'll continue reading tomorrow. I am actually enjoying this reading very much. Let's tackle it. Let's tackle this. Rosa Parks is one of the most well-known symbols of resistance during the African American Civil Rights Movement in the 1950s and 1960s. She is remembered primarily for sparking. I'm still a teenager, folks, believe me. No, I'm 29. She is remembered primarily for sparking the Montgomery bus boycott and as the mother of the civil rights movement. In popular mythology, Miss Parks was an ordinary woman who simply decided one day that she would not give up her seat to a white person in a lonely act of defiance. In reality, Miss Parks was an experienced civil rights activist who received political education and civil disobedience training at the well-known leftist Highlander Folk School. I didn't know there was a folk school I can attend to that taught me leftist values and ways to organize radically. I'd like to participate in that, which still exists today. It says, wow, that's so cool. I want to get involved in that. That sounds like fun. Miss Parks' refusal to give up her seat was far from a lonely act, but rather just one of a series of civil disobedience by civil rights leaders to target segregation in public services. The civil rights movement of the period was a product of the labor and brilliance of countless New World Africans, enslaved people, African American people, and their allies working since before the founding of the United States. Not simply attributable to any one person. The portrayal of mass struggle as individualistic acts hides a deeper understanding of oppression and the need for broad resistance. And that's kind of what I was like getting at before, was that sometimes the truth is more badass than the myth. Really, I mean, Rosa Parks is someone I would commemorate as someone that is important to the resistance. But she's not the only one, right? You and I were also important to the revolution and to the resistance and to the making of a better world. I think that if we, I'm very critical to even anarchists, even like myself, who, use Peter Kropotkin as like some, hey, he's got all the answers. Kropotkin does not have all the answers, my friend. As I have a Kropotkin pin right here, Kropotkin ain't got all the answers. I mean, if Kropotkin single-handedly had all the answers, then he wouldn't have had to deal with being exiled from all of the fucking countries he's been kicked out of. The Soviet Union of all countries would not have, given him so much fucking shit. I mean, yeah, he was welcomed back into the Soviet Union, but, he would have been able to accelerate the Soviet Union's efforts to a communistic world. But that's not the solution that Kropotkin posed in his literature, in his speeches and his pamphlets. So, Kropotkin is only a thinker, he's only an anarchist communist thinker, just like we are. We are thinkers, and we have to put those thoughts and ideas into praxis, I think, using one particular person to have all the answers is a recipe for disaster. I mean, we're all human here. Even people who have good ideas are, just human, and they're prone to mistakes. One good example I would give is Vosh. There's a lot of things he says that's very agreeable, and I think that fundamentally speaking, Vosh, as he platforms a lot of the ideas that he has and a lot of the framing of the issues that he points out are very good and legitimate. But a lot of his solutions, such as reform, and also just the way he handles his own racism and sexism, it's actually very detrimental to the very movement he's trying to build. And that's probably the nicest way I can critique Vosh, by the way. I'm not going to make this an anti-Vosh stream, but I'm using Vosh as an example, and I hope you understand where I'm coming from. I'm sure some Vosh stand's going to be in the comment or the chat being like, it's just fucking molding at what I just said. Anyway, here's another example of the hero mindset that I was just talking about. It talks about Oprah, and I'll talk to you about Oprah in a second, my opinion on that. Oprah's well-publicized giveaways, as well as a range of television shows that feature big wins, such as makeovers, new houses, and new cars, have helped to create the image of social change in our society as individual acts of charity, rather than concerted efforts of mass groups of people to change relationships of power. These portrayals affirm the false idea that we live in a meritocracy, in which any one individual's individual's perseverance and hard work are the only keys needed to wealth and success. Such portrayals hide realities like the racial wealth divide and other conditions that produce and maintain inequality on a group level, ensuring that most people will not rise above or fall below their place in the economy, regardless of their individual actions. In reality, social change that alters the relationship of power throughout history have actually come about when large groups of people have worked together towards a common goal. So here's the conclusion towards this section here, and then we're going to get to the next section, which we will continue tomorrow. Again, I hope you all are having fun reading this, and I've been having fun reading this to you and having these discussions, and I like hearing what you guys got to say. So be sure to comment and rate, like, whatever, subscribe, I don't know, whatever you all want to do. But share this with your friends, I'm going to do a part 2 tomorrow. I'm also going to try to get that video out soon. I know I said I would do it today, but sorry. I failed. I had a lot to do today. I was very busy today. It's not because I was not sitting on my ass, I promise. Anyway, together the tactics that we describe as functions. Hold on. Together, the tactics that we described above function as a strategy of counter-revolution, an attempt to squash the collective health and political will of oppressed people, and to buy off people with privilege in order to support the status quo. This is a profoundly traumatic process that deepens centuries of pain, loss, and harm experienced by people of color, immigrants, queer and trans people, women, and others marked as disposable by the capitalist system. That's my insert there. For many of us, this included losing our lives and our loved ones to the devastating government sanctions, HIV and AIDS pandemic, and ongoing attacks from families, neighbors, and government officials. Perhaps one of the most painful features of this period has been the separating of oppressed communities and movements from one another. Even though our communities are all overlapping and our struggles for liberation are fundamentally linked, the divide and conquer strategy of the New World Order has taught us to think of our identities and struggles as separate and competing. In particular, it was useful to maintaining harmful systems and conditions to create false divides between purportedly separate white, gays, issues, and straight people of color, immigrants, and working class issues to prevent deep partnerships across multiple lines of difference from social transformation. In this context, the most visible and well-funded arms of LGBT organization got caught up in fighting for small-scale reforms and battles to be recognized as equal and visible under the law and in the media without building the sustained power and self-determination of oppressed communities. Instead of trying to change the system, the official LGBT agenda fought to just be welcomed into it, in exchange for helping to keep other oppressed people at the bottom. But thankfully, that's not the end of the story. As we described below, this period also neutered I'm sorry. As described below, this period also nurtured powerful strands of radical queer and trans politics, organizing at the intersections of oppression and struggles, and in the legacy of the revolutionary freedom fighters of an earlier generation. So that's it for today. The next section is called Reclaiming a Radical Legacy. I'm gonna put in. I know y'all hate when I earmark books. I don't care. I do it. Get mad in chat. I don't care. I do want to read what y'all have to say before I end the stream. But I had a good time today, and I'm really thankful y'all joined me. Before I begin, before I read your comments, I did want to quickly point out that I've been working on myself to be able to get the things that I need, like health insurance and food and some kind of survivability. It's been hard throughout 2021 for me. It's actually been hard for me in 2020, like entirely. And I currently am trying to get my DMV registration in the state that I live in right now. So what I'm trying to do here, is I'm trying to not only change my name legally, I'm also trying to change my gender marker, and what I'm doing, it might not actually get that done, but it should at least get me registered into the state that I live in. So what I would like, if you guys want to help support me at all, there's a link in the description for all the things that you can participate in and do to help me. There's a bunch of links, including buying my music. You can buy my music and you can name your own price in that regard. So if you want to buy it for free, you can get my music for free. If you wanna pay $1,000, that's great too. For the DMV thing, I need like a maximum of $75 because I don't know. Like I don't know. I think that the minimum is 35, the maximum 75. That's what my friend who is helping me do all this says that is gonna have to cost. So again, if you want to help me, you're more than welcome to do that. Actually, in general, I could use some money just to fucking eat. I'm actually 2 months late on rent too, so yeah. But anyway, I'll read your chat before we take off. Something here. Looks like a lot of people started talking after I continued reading. This is about transforming the world through truly transcendent change via dismantling these inadequate and oppressive systems not focused on revenge. The newest video dropped by St. Andrewism echoes these sentiments. I highly recommend. I love St. Andrewism. I've watched a good handful of St. Andrewism videos, and I actually would recommend you all go check out St. Andrewism as well. I think I like how calm St. Andrewism is. Like it's very pacifying because it's just like when listening to these discussions about these really hard issues to discuss, it's very reassuring to have St. Andrewism voice talking about it. I'm sorry that I apologize if that part got too heavy there, Miss Danger. I don't blame you. I'm not mad at you. If you needed to check out, that's fine. No worries. I know part of the way through we started talking about some really heavy shit. So I don't blame you. I'm not mad at you. I get it. I should have given a better content warning on that one. I'll do better next time, I promise. And I think I'll even attempt or try to put a content warning in the description after the stream is over. They can't perform when you're watching. The only reason federal breakfast programs started was to undermine the Black Panthers breakfast program. I didn't know about that. Wait, I missed sugar in the gas tanks. So fun. What happened? Don't forget sugar in the gas tanks? I don't know what you're talking about. Is that a thing that that Earth First did? That's probably something a thing Earth First did. I don't remember about that. What do you mean with abolition? Well, as we were talking about through this entire stream, when we talk about abolition, we're talking about addressing the issues that the institutions use to oppress marginalized people, and coming up with a more transformative way to come about building a better community structure that addresses the issues that we face with under the capitalist state that we live in today, such as crime and lack of health care. Actually, that's kind of the big argument with defund the police right now, or rather, I'd like to say abolish the police, is that defunding or abolishing the police will give the resources that the police have stolen from us, and that the police get so much fucking funding for, in order to fund actual community services that would benefit the people that are within the communities, such as healthcare and food programs and distributions, things like that. So I think it's really, when we talk about abolition, we're talking more about the overall abolition, yes, of the state, yes, of the police, and yes, of the prison industry. But more importantly, we're talking about building a new revolutionary solution to these overarching problems that the state sort of legitimizes itself on trying to create, like a monopolistic apparatus on violence against the people for its own exploitation and reaping of resources. I hope that makes sense. If you want to talk to me, I'm on Discord. The link is in the description. You're more than welcome to talk with me on that kind of stuff if you're interested in diving further into it. What organization again? I'm sorry. I guess I must have... I wasn't looking at chat while I was reading this. I did that intentionally to prevent getting distracted. I was talking about Earth First at one point though. Let's see. Kropotkin actually was using a lot of info from native cultures here on Turtle Island. That is true, yes. No argument, plenty of problems with Foch. This has been really good. Sugar in the gas tanks of Earth First, yeah. Okay, yeah, I see what you mean. Yep, alright, well, it looks like I'm done for the day. Thank you all for joining. I hope this was fruitful to you, and I hope that y'all learned a lot. I learned a lot, and I had fun talking about it.